All right, Alexander, let's do an update on what is going on in Ukraine. And what an incredible past couple of days from Prigozhin and the video that he put out. And now we have Surovikin, who seems to be the person tasked with managing all of this. And yesterday we had quite an active day from the Russian military. Drones, missiles, glider bombs, which appear to be posing a big problem for the Zelensky regime. I mean, a very, very big problem. Actually, I think the Telegraph even did a story on the problem that these bombs are posing for the Ukraine military. But it's the Russian Air Force that is at work, and the Russian Air Force is at work because of the depletion of the S-300 air defense, which we have talked about in previous videos. And we have the Victory Day parade, which we are gearing up for. So what would you like to start off with?
Well, can I just say, first of all, the Victory Day parade is an immense event in Russia. I mean, I think you've actually been in Russia when it's been celebrated, so you have some conception of what an enormous holiday that is. And it is important to stress this is obviously a state event, but it is also very much a public event. The Russian population are extremely engaged in it. There isn't a single Russian family that wasn't touched by the Second World War in some way, mostly, in most cases, in a very great way. So this is for them a huge event. And I'm getting the sense that an awful lot of what's going on, or at least what Ukraine is doing, seems to be driven by trying to rain on the parade, if you like, to trying to spoil this day for the Russians. And it's creating a very sort of edgy, nervous, rather tense atmosphere around this parade in ways, and around this holiday, in ways that I've never known before, and which, speaking about this politically, I suspect is only in the end, once more, going to confirm widespread feeling, which I know already exists in Russia, that this is a government in Kiev that simply cannot be tolerated, and that it must be, driven out of existence. I say that because the Ukraine's military intelligence chief, a man called Budanov, has made some incredibly strong comments about, the importance of, killing Russians, which seem to go beyond the war itself. And now there's increasing talk about, declaring Ukraine a kind of terrorist state, which, of course, if the Russians do that, then that, in effect, precludes negotiations. So there is this tension, there is this nervousness around Victory Day, concern about what the Ukrainians might do. But the reality is that even though all the talk is of a Ukrainian offensive, it is the Russians over the last couple of days who have been massively on the attack. Now, one area where they're on the attack is in Bakhmut, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, the Prigozhin melodrama took another turn yesterday. He announced that everything had been sorted out. The military had promised him all the ammunition he needed. General Surovikin, who, if you remember, well, as of course you do remember, was at one period of time the overall commander, the theatre commander, back in September, October. He's now been brought back and has now become Prigozhin's line manager. In my opinion, Surovikin has never gone away. Whenever I've seen pictures of Putin or other people on the battlefronts visiting the headquarters, Surovikin has always been there. He's always dominated the meetings. He's always the man pointing to the maps and those kind of things. I think he remains the overall commander, but he's clearly been put in to sort of try and take charge of this Prigozhin business and the Wagner business. And the result is that over the last couple of hours also, we've had a major renewed Russian advance in Bakhmut itself. Now, what's left of Ukrainian-controlled Bakhmut is just a couple of buildings. And that might be a bit of an overstatement, but not much. Just a couple of isolated, increasingly isolated buildings on the western fringes. And over the last couple of hours, the Russians have been storming and capturing them. And it could be that this is what Prigozhin wants, that he wants to capture the whole of Bakhmut by Victory Day, so that he'll be the great victor who captured Bakhmut and achieved this victory on Victory Day. The Ukrainians, General Syrskyi, the Ukrainian Ground Forces commander, has now issued a contrary statement to Ukrainian troops. He says that their mission is to prevent the fall of Bakhmut by the 9th of May, by tomorrow, in other words, by Victory Day. It seems that this whole battle now has come down to an issue between these two people, Prigozhin and Syrskyi, over a holiday. And I think that Surovikin, who clearly is the one general, Russian general, that Prigozhin is a bit intimidated by and respects, has been basically brought in to sort of calm things, bring things under control, make sure that, as I said, the fighting in Bakhmut is indeed finally brought by an end, even if not by a particular time and date. And then I'm confident also that once that's done, the Wagner troops will be withdrawn from Bakhmut. New troops are apparently pouring in. Chechens is reported to be there. Regular Russian army are also reported to be moving in. And I think the Wagner forces will be sent back to the rear and refitted and given a rest, which they urgently need. They've been fighting in Bakhmut continuously since November, so they absolutely need a rest. And as you've rightly said in previous videos, Prigozhin clearly does too.
Yeah, so I mean, the whole final 2-3 square kilometers, whatever's left, is obviously all about a media narrative. And I understand Prigozhin and Wagner. Okay, they want to finish what they've started and what they've been doing for the past 6 months, and so he wants to bring it to its completion. If he can bring it to its completion by Victory Day, I guess for Prigozhin even better for him. But the Ukraine military, it seems they're holding on to what essentially is lost, just so they don't give the Russian side some sort of May 9th celebration, while at the same time they can then go to the collective West media and they can pump out stories along the lines of, Russia celebrates Victory Day, but it can't take Bakhmut, right? Something like that CNN or MSNBC are going to start pumping out. It's maybe it fits this war. I mean, I don't know. This conflict has been bizarre in so many ways.
Yes.
I guess this is a fitting end to the Battle of Bakhmut.
Yes.
I mean, what more can I say?
Well, I mean, it's tragedy mixed up with farce. Tragedy because people are dying. But I mean, the idea of, running your war in this kind of fashion, a war in which people are being killed, I mean, it has a farcical quality about it. But, you said that this is the pattern of the war. It is the pattern of the war. Look at the bizarre events that have happened over the last 2 weeks or so. About a week, 10 days ago, reports that the Ukrainians had crossed the Dnieper River into Kherson region, embedded themselves there, and that they were, managed successfully to cross the Dnieper. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry denies this. They said there's absolutely no truth to this story. Then other officials in Ukraine continue to claim it. The Western media and Ukrainian media pick it up. It circulates. Eventually, quietly, that story is dropped, but it is clearly nonsense. Another story, clearly an attempt to create a story around a drone. You remember, I'm sure you've seen the pictures, this Bayraktar drone flying over Kiev. We've had all kinds of bizarre explanations about what it was doing. I've no doubt that it was intended again as a piece of theatre. Ukraine sent its drones against the Kremlin, was awaiting this great Russian, response. It didn't materialize. So, of course, they had to send their own drone up in order to shoot it down, because that's what happened. I mean, people are overanalyzing the events. They're saying, did the Russians hack it? Did the drone fly off course? All of those things. It's clearly, as far as I'm concerned, everything points to this being, again, a piece of theatre. And then the even more bizarre story about the downing of the hypersonic Kinjal missile, that, the Ukraine shoots down a Kinjal missile. They show, a nose cone of something or other that they say is a Kinjal missile. This is what the Patriot missile can do. You have, again, the Ukrainian Air Defense Command. They said, no, we didn't do it. We haven't got the capability. There's even, at one point, the Ukrainian Air Defense Commander Ignat actually said 1,000 times, no, this isn't true. This story isn't true. And yet, Ukrainian media outlets and parts of the Western media are still running with this story.
CNN.
CNN, absolutely. It borders on the ludicrous, but you could see what is happening. The whole thing, this whole war, is once again being run increasingly as a kind of big media operation, and one can understand to some extent the logic of it, in the sense that, kind of twisted logic. If you can't win real victories, you win invented ones. Your soldiers are across the Dnieper. You're shooting down Russian drones. You're shooting down Russian hypersonic missiles. Therefore, give us more weapons, more missiles, more aircraft, all of these things. But none of this is real. The trouble is, even as all this unreality is circulating, you have to deal with actual, real events that are also taking place. Last night, there was this massive Russian missile, drone, bombing strike right across Ukraine. There's a report today that a warehouse was bombed in Odessa, and there's a fire there that's blazing that covers 6 kilometers. I mean, huge damage being created that way. There's all these rumors about this Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is one day it's on, the next day it's off. We no longer know any more exactly when it's going to happen. I mean, at some point, presumably, it will happen, but so we get General Pavel, the Czech president. He turns up in Kiev. He says, don't do this offensive now. It'd be a huge mistake. It's your one shot. It could easily go wrong. You're not trained enough. Your weapons aren't ready. So wait a couple of months. And he also says, rather ominously for the Ukrainians, you might actually lose the war, and we got to, in the West, prepare for that possibility. We have Reznikov coming along saying to Washington Post, I believe, that we're having all this trouble. There's 500,000 men against us, which, by the way, there are. That's the first confirmation I've seen in the Western media that the Russians have 500,000 men now in the theatre, of whom only a fraction have actually been fighting over the last few weeks. Just, take note of that. That we're up against 500,000 men. The other side is an air force. The other side is missiles. The other side is ammunition. The other side is fortifications. We must dampen our expectations. We might suffer heavy losses. So you have Reznikov saying that. And then, of course, on the other side, you have a person, I forget which, another Ukrainian official. He speaks to The Independent, a British newspaper. He says it's going to be fine. We're going to attack. The Russians will panic and they'll flee. They'll run away. So you have, as I said, this extraordinary mixture of tragedy and farce. I think the Russians actually must at times be utterly bewildered by it. And the fact that they have their own oversized personalities like Prigozhin to deal with can't make it any easier.
Yeah. Ghost of Kiev, Zaporozhye Avengers, Siege of Kiev, Great Kherson counteroffensive, Great Kharkiv counteroffensive, all of these fictions that the collective West has created, it has trapped the Zelensky regime.
Yes.
Because they have to surpass these false narratives
Yes.
that have been created by the Zelensky regime, but also by the collective West.
Yes.
If you don't have a great victory, the scale of the Great Kherson counteroffensive, well, then we're not going to give you weapons. I think to myself, why doesn't Reznikov just come clean with it and say, you know what, guys? The Great Kherson counteroffensive wasn't really much of a counteroffensive because the Russians retreated in a very orderly manner. They created a new defensive line, and when we moved in there, they launched all kinds of artillery at us, and it was a complete debacle.
Yes.
But they've trapped themselves in these huge, 300 style cinematic narratives, and I think we were the first channel that described this conflict in terms of being something out of cinema. The reality, though, is that the collective West in Ukraine are running around looking for air defense. They're looking for S-300s, looking for S-400s. And just yesterday, the Turkish foreign minister said the U.S. has approached us and they asked us for our S-400s and our S-300s. I know in Cyprus and Greece, they did the same thing. The reality of the situation is that Ukraine is losing its air defense, and they're going to launch a counteroffensive, which it appears they're not ready to launch.
Exactly. And of course, and this is the tragedy of it, men are going to die. Not just men, of course, lots of people are going to die in order to keep this movie moving. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Reznikov himself confirmed exactly the point that you were making, that you only have to read the Washington Post article to see this, that the reason Ukraine is now trapped by its own narratives about those previous offensives. So it has to cap them and it has to, achieve more this time because of what it claimed it achieved in those two offensives in the autumn, which of course, as you absolutely rightly said, it didn't actually achieve anything of those two offensives in the autumn. Nothing decisive. A lot of people died, but in terms of the actual change to the course of the war, it wasn't achieved. And in the meantime, even as all this bizarre drama is going on, you are now starting to see signs of cracks, even within Neocon Central, because there's a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal which says that there's now a split between the National Security Council, i.e. between Sullivan, and the State Department, i.e. Blinken and Nuland. Blinken and Nuland, the keepers of the Neocon flame, they want the offensive to go on. They're still committed to victory at any cost, at any price. Sullivan, supposedly, is starting to come round to the idea of negotiations. But of course, he has no real plan about how to negotiate. He's no real idea of what to do. He's perhaps just a little bit more connected to reality than the others, but he still wants the offensive to happen because, we've, advertised the movie, we've published all the commercials, we've shown, the sort of tasters, all of that sort of thing. People have seen it on their TV sets, that this great offensive is coming. So we can't disappoint the audience.
What is Russia doing right now, Alexander? What is going on? I hear they're hitting Chasov Yar. We've got confirmation that they've taken out a very important bridge, which is one of the main routes of transporting weapons from Romania into the Donbass. They hit Kiev. They hit Dnipro. We're talking just a huge a huge effort from the Russian military to, it seems, to just hit the entire rear of Ukraine's military as they struggle to get this offensive underway.
Absolutely, that's exactly what the Russians are doing. We're starting to see the Russian military system cranking up. I mean, in the first couple of months of the war, they tried to fight more a political war than a military struggle. As events have gradually evolved, they are seeing it more and more in strict, simple military terms. And we see that their resources are now coming out into the open. We had pictures of Shoigu, the defense minister, with hundreds of tanks, new T-90M tanks. And apparently they're producing more and more infantry fighting vehicles, more and more shells. And of course, they've got 500,000 men in the theatre. But what they're doing is they're waiting for the Ukrainians to come to them. That's been their tactic. Surovikin announced it back in October. He said, we'll build all our fortifications, we'll build up our reserves, and we will grind the Ukrainians down. And the one piece of useful information that's come out of Prigozhin over the last couple of days, because he's made one statement, one bizarre statement out of it after another, but he's given a very detailed explanation of his discussions with Surovikin back in October. And Surovikin said, look, we're going to hit Bakhmut. You're going to take the advance there. This is a trap. It's even more important that you draw as many Ukrainian troops into Bakhmut as possible than that you actually capture the place, because we are going to stage this as a meat grinder, even as the rest of our military gradually gears up and prepares. And that's exactly what happened. And you remember, this is exactly what Surovikin did with the attacks on the energy system. The real purpose, I think it's now clear, was to deplete Ukraine's air defenses. And he did the same with Bakhmut, in effect. He takes things that Ukraine feels it has to defend and causes Ukraine to burn up its resources trying to defend them. So the energy system, they had to defend it. And so they've lost most of their S-300s. And as you correctly said, the West is now on an expedition hunting around the world, trying to find air defense systems to send to Ukraine, and there just aren't any. And he's done the same with Bakhmut. He's ground down the Ukrainian forces there. The Ukrainians have suffered extremely heavy losses defending Bakhmut, and they've also lost a lot of, their not very great supplies, stocks of ammunition. And again, the West is begging around the world, trying to find ammunition to keep the Ukrainians supplied with ammunition. So you can see Surovikin's tactics. We conserve our forces, we suffer as few losses as we can, we inflict the maximum pain on the Ukrainians, we're grinding them steadily and methodically down. Now, how this is going to end, I'm not party to Russian plans. I don't know. There's two contradictory views. Scott Ritter has said Russians have now 500,000 men in theatre. The Ukrainians are rapidly running out of material and men. The Russians could end it this year. That's the Scott Ritter view. A Russian commander on the battle lines, a man called Apti Alaudinov, who's actually a Chechen, he said, look, what we're actually going to do is something different. We're not going to launch big arrow offensives. There's no reason why we should. We're going to continue exactly as we're doing, methodically, incrementally. We're going to continue to advance slowly, gradually, grinding the Ukrainians down, and eventually the Ukrainians will collapse, and they will collapse sometime around August, September of next year. And notice the timing of that. It's a few weeks before the presidential election.
Yeah, I also think that Ukraine is starting to change its tactics as well, and it seems like they're moving towards with the direction of Budanov. I think Budanov is the guy that's driving this. It does seem like they're moving towards some sort of tactic to create little like pinprick terrorist strikes, and they're even going after. It seems like they're increasingly going after journalists and
Yeah.
politicians, and
Yes. Yeah.
it seems like they're drifting towards this direction
Yes.
more than actual military confrontation.
Yes, indeed. And can I just point out, this is exactly, in a way, mirrors those statements. You remember that article, I think it was in Foreign Policy, that Ukraine, in order to win its offensive, in order for this offensive to succeed, it must cause panic and paralysis within the Russian political leadership and its military. And that has to be achieved within the first 24 hours. I have had this other Ukrainian official talking about, if we launch this offensive, the Russians will panic. It's all now becoming increasingly, more than anything else, it's all about mind games, causing the Russians to panic, causing them to become scared and frightened. And, basically, the idea is precipitate some kind of crisis in Moscow through these kind of attacks and hope that somehow changes the direction of the war. Now, I have to say, I've had encounters with Russians, also in business world, and I must say that I've never known a Russian to panic. just to make that observation. And someone else who I'm in correspondence with, who was a former intelligence officer, British intelligence officer, and worked in Russia, has made exactly the same point, that you can take the Russians by surprise. You can't ever really panic them. So I don't think this is going to be a successful strategy, but it is leading Ukraine into a very dark place. It's some of the things it's doing. So you have these assassinations of people. There was another one attempted the other day against a Russian writer. We have these bomb attacks, these drone attacks, all of these sort of things. And as I said, it does look like it's intended to create an atmosphere of panic and even terror. I think it's going to do the opposite.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave the video there, theduran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, and Telegram, and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.